A single dad mechanic steps up when a factory's flagship machine fails and elite engineers give up. He restores it through grit and insight, earns the CEO's respect, and their bond grows from skepticism to admiration to love. Their partnership transforms the company and its culture. The factory never sounded like this. Silence, hot and metallic, pressed against the ribs of the building until even the rafters felt accused. A wall of red numbers bled on a control panel, stopped counters, stalled quotas, contracts hemorrhaging in invisible figures only the boardroom would ever see. The million-dollar machine, Alara, the crown jewel, sat like a felled animal, gorgeous and utterly useless. Elena Voss stood in the middle of the floor like a fixed point the chaos orbited. 40 razor-sharp eyes, collared shirt open at the throat like someone who wouldn't let a necktie choke her. Behind her, a suffocating stack of contingencies waited in unread emails. In front of her, a half-moon of engineers murmured in technical Latin, palms up, proof of impotence. She'd built this empire with hours that cost her friends, sleep, and softness. It had never asked for mercy until now. Every hour we lose, a month of leverage melts, she said. Her voice carried in the hush. Talk to me. They did. Vibration anomalies. Firmware corruption. Thermal cascade. Vendor lockouts. A litany of complications without a single answer. One suggested scrapping the core and waiting for parts only the supplier could authorize. Another had a plan that included the word pray, which wasn't funny. Near the tool cages, where the smell of solvent lived, a man leaned on a rolling cart. Oil-worn shirt, boots that belonged to someone who worked for a living, eyes that missed nothing. Daniel Hale didn't belong in a photo with people who signed off on digits with 6 zeros, but machines spoke to him like old neighbors. He'd come to swap a hydraulic line in an auxiliary press and stayed because silence in a factory felt like a cry for help. He slid closer as if approaching a skittish animal. His gaze traced conduits, linkages, heat discoloration patterns that told their own story. He didn't say anything yet. He never led with words. He led with attention. Anyone else? Elena asked. It wasn't sarcasm so much as a dare to the air. Daniel raised a hand. A couple engineers turned with a smirk, the help. He nodded once, as if confirming with himself that ridicule changed nothing. I can take a look. Elena's stare flicked down to his boots, up to his hands, back to his eyes. She didn't see letters after his name. She saw scars. An old reflex tugged, liability, insurance, optics. A newer impulse, born from fear and something like hunger for answers, flexed in her jaw. Name? Daniel. Qualifications? 15 years of listening, he said. 10 taking apart problems that don't think they're problems. I don't need permissions. I need time. It should have annoyed her. Somehow, it steadied her. You get 1 hour, she said. No power restores. Observation only. Daniel nodded and set his palm on Alara's skin. The metal was cold, but not dead. He closed his eyes as if catching a breath he'd been chasing for months. In that quiet, the factory heard the faintest sound, the intention of a man who'd been underestimated his whole life. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere distant. Inside, one pair of hands went to work. He worked like water, finding seams with patience. He traced heat bloom on panels, fingered the dust lines that broke where a hand had wiped in a hurry, followed cable troughs to the point where labeling went from professional to pen and tape improvisation. He didn't touch the heart. He built a map. Alara's got a choke in her breath, he murmured, mostly to the machine and a little to himself. Either she's being told to hold back, or she's protecting something. Protecting, an engineer repeated, incredulous. Failsafes don't panic, Daniel said without looking up. They retreat. Elena hovered within earshot, arms folded. She kept the floor while her operations lead managed the tidal wave of calls. A thought needled her. Why did his language, untrained and imprecise, make more sense than the cascade of PDFs she'd been fed for days? At the hour mark, Daniel stood and finally asked for power, not to start, just to wake. 5 seconds, he said. Then cut. Her safety officer opened his mouth to argue. Elena cut across him. 5. Then cut. They lifted the master. Lights along Alara's spine came alive in a sequence glow, like vertebrae waking. Daniel leaned in, listening, not with his ear but his bones. On the third second, his hand shot to a junction box. There. Cut. Elena barked. The power died. A dozen faces swung to Daniel. Your surge suppression is stepping down a fire that shouldn't be there, he said, tapping the box. Either a ground's got religion or you've got noise coming from the control rack. That rack is vendor sealed, someone warned. He nodded. Then the noise is upstream. And this, he said, opening a panel with the kind of reverence someone reserves for a violin, is aftermarket. Elena stepped in. The cabling inside didn't match the factory diagrams she'd memorized the week they installed Alara. Tension went taut under her skin. Aftermarket meant a decision, and decisions meant fingerprints. Who authorized this? She asked, voice flat as steel. No one answered. Daniel's fingers hovered over a splice that preferred not to be seen. He traced it to a control board add-on, clever, cheap, cutting corners that wouldn't show until they did. He didn't look at her when he said, "It saved you energy," until it didn't. She inhaled. She knew exactly which quarter that savings bought them breathing room. She also knew which signature would sit under it. The floor seemed to tilt a degree, not from embarrassment, but from the weight of owning the cost. Daniel closed the panel. I can bypass and stabilize, he said. But it voids your warranty and makes me the person you'll blame if the vendor gets mad and the board wants blood. You're remarkably calm for someone volunteering to be a target, Elena said. I've been one before, he said. I also have a daughter who likes lights and hot food. I'm not reckless. I'm careful. For the first time, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You'll need access, time, and a shadow, she said, meaning oversight. I'll need a promise, he answered. When I tell you to stop, we stop. No egos. No optics. Around them, the room listened to two people negotiating not just a repair, but trust. Elena extended her hand. Deal. His palm was warm, solid, real. A contract older than paper. By sundown, the factory changed personality. The day crew left with their caffeine and cynicism. Night poured in, and the place started to sound like itself again. Tools clinking, metal ticking as it cooled. A radio from maintenance whispering a song about people who want too much and get just enough. Daniel spread his sketches on the floor like constellations, signal paths, power segments, ghost currents that haunted the line. He labeled nothing with jargon. He wrote what machines would say if they had mouths. Protecting. Retreating. Choking. The words made the problem human. Elena came back in a hoodie that looked like it had never been worn outdoors. She set coffee by his foot without ceremony. What happens if you're wrong? I've been wrong, he said. Wrong teaches. Right pays the rent. A text buzzed on his cracked phone. He checked it and went still for a second that lasted longer than it should. Elena pretended not to notice, then did. Everything okay? My neighbor, he said, voice hitching into the careful register people use when they don't want pity. Ivy's fever came back. She's 8. I promised I'd be there by 9. He looked at Alara and then at the door as if the building had grown walls to test him. Go, Elena said. He shook his head. We're open on the patient. Can't leave a heart on the table. I have a medical kit, she deadpanned, then relented. I'll have Lopez sit on the line and watch. Clock's not our friend, Daniel. Neither is a sick kid. He scrubbed his hands at the sink until the water ran cold and clear. He took his jacket and, for the first time, she saw the tremor under all that steadiness. He wasn't a myth. He was a man with a tiny universe to protect. I'll be back in an hour, he said. You have 2, she said. Take the extra one and pretend it was my idea. He returned in 90 minutes with a pharmacy bag and a look in his eyes that had traded panic for a plan. She's okay, he said before she could ask. Cool cloth, cartoons, an oath to the gods of orange juice. Ilara's still here, Elena said softly. So am I. He knelt and got back to work. The bypass he proposed would isolate the aftermarket board, reroute control logic to factory spec, and build a sacrificial buffer in case the upstream racket tried to punch again. Clean. Elegant. Dangerous to anyone whose job depended on vendor compliance. You're asking me to put my name on a decision that admits we cut a corner, she said. I'm asking you to tell the truth faster than anyone else can weaponize it, he said. Machines don't care about politics. She watched his hands, their patience. She wondered who had taught him to be gentle and ruthless at the same time. Maybe life. Maybe the same daughter who had him sprinting across town and back to a dead engine like it was a sleeping child. When he finished, he exhaled through his nose and looked up. We do this now or not at all, he said. Momentum matters. Fear grows in pauses. Fear was an executive she had long since fired. Do it, she said. They shut the doors. The board didn't get a call. The vendor didn't get a courtesy email. 2 signatures, verbal, human, binding, opened a path machines understand. Power, purpose, and the courage to connect. By 2 a.m., the factory looked like a chapel. Fewer people, deeper quiet, a kind of reverence that happens when stakes are high enough to make you whisper without meaning to. The safety officer hovered, trying not to hover. An engineer who had smirked earlier now held a light like an altar boy. Daniel checked his work thrice, then once more for luck he didn't technically believe in. He walked Alara's perimeter, laying his palm like a blessing on each section that had earned his respect. Feed, press, draw, egress. He scribbled last-minute numbers in the margin of a blueprint with a carpenter's pencil worn to a stub. Tell me what I'm listening for, Elena said, stepping beside him. First hum is power, he said. You'll think you hear victory. That's just the orchestra tuning. Second hum is handshake between control and reality. That's the part that'll try to hide a lie. Third sound is the one you want. That's breath. And if we hear a fourth? Run, he said. It was a joke with teeth. He looked at her. Not the CEO. The person. I don't need your approval, he said quietly. I need your courage. If I say cut, you cut. Even if the board's in your ear. Even if your pride wants one more second. She nodded once. There were entire quarters of her life she could catalog by the seconds she'd held too long. Agreed. He took position. Safety stood by the kill switch like a priest at a chord. Elena watched Daniel's hands more than she watched the machine. She had seen thousands of presentations, 100 deals hinge on posture and smile. She had never seen hands like his make a case. They were eloquent. Power, he said. The lights rose from spine to head. The first hum crawled into the room, low, electric, promising. The safety officer tensed. Daniel cocked his head. Good girl, he whispered, and Elena hated how the words warmed her. Handshake, he said. The control rack flickered. There was a moment, a single-beat hitch, that felt like a lie learning to speak. Daniel's fingers danced over the auxiliary panel he'd rigged, smoothing the signal like a hand across a wrinkled sheet. The hitch softened. The hum deepened. A pressure change tugged the air. The second display went from angry orange to patient green. Elena didn't breathe. Breath, he said. For a heartbeat. Nothing. Then a low exhale rolled down Alara's frame, an animal waking, a river remembering it was a river. Belts moved. Gears leaned into each other with the intimacy of trust rediscovered. A gauge that had sulked all week lifted its chin. The sound wasn't loud. It was right. A chime stabbed the moment. An alarm. The safety officer's hand shot for the kill switch. Wait, Daniel said, hand up, eyes on a single tiny light in the corner of the control rack. It's a ghost. False positive from the orphan board. Give me 2 seconds. 2, Elena said, voice clipped, heart trying to bolt. He flipped a micro toggle and held a breath like a diver. The alarm winked out, embarrassed. Silence didn't return. Something better did. Hello, Alara, Daniel said, grinning despite himself. Around them, relief arrived in a flood that almost knocked people to their knees. It wasn't over. It was beginning. They hadn't won on luck. They had chosen a price and paid it in courage, care, and truth. Elena swallowed the shake in her hands. Bring her to Idle, she said softly. Let's make sure victory isn't just loud. Idle held. Temperatures drifted into the band Daniel had drawn on his paper. Vibrations settled into a signature he could have recognized in his sleep. He nodded to the safety officer. We ramp in 10% increments, he said. We respect what we woke. At 30%, the factory took a breath with him. The belt sang a note he had missed like a friend's laugh. At 50, an engineer whispered something reverent and didn't get teased for it. At 80, the floor thrummed into shoes. Elena felt the vibration climb her spine and park behind her eyes like a headache that had chosen, for once, to be kind. 90, Daniel said. His voice wasn't cocky. It was grateful. 95, Elena answered, because she could. Bring her home, Daniel said, and the last increment slid in like the end of a cord you didn't know you'd been waiting for all your life. Alara roared. Not the tantrum of a machine forced. The triumphant, clean bellow of a system in agreement with itself. A cheer erupted, desperate and relieved, and a little hysterical. Someone cried. Someone else didn't pretend not to. The night crew who wore cynicism like armor threw it to the floor and stomped it flat. Elena didn't move. She stepped to Daniel instead, the way people step toward a thing they feared and now, finally, respect. Close enough to see oil in the nail beds and the thread frayed on his cuff. Close enough to smell coffee and sweat and the faint chemical signature of electronics that had decided to live. You did it, she said. The words were wrong. We did it, she corrected. That one fit. He shook his head. You owned the decision. I just kept my promise. Her throat tightened. She remembered the cost-cutting quarter like a scar you pretend you like. Then here's another one, she said, voice lower, private in a public room. Tomorrow, I brief the board. We disclose. We fix the procurement culture that rewarded that choice. We build a line between savings and sabotage, and we don't cross it again. That's not going to be popular, he said. I didn't build this to win popularity, she said. I built it to deserve survival. He laughed, a short, surprised sound that warmed the air. The room was still cheering, still slapping backs, still turning disbelief into legend. The legend would be wrong in 100 ways. It would say a poor mechanic saved the day alone. It would say a brilliant CEO saw his genius from the start. It would miss the hours, the fear, the gentleness hidden in steel. Elena reached for his hand without planning to. He met her halfway. The touch landed somewhere between gratitude and gravity. Something passed between them that neither would call by its name yet. It wasn't a dare. It wasn't a joke. It was a beginning disguised as relief. Go home, she said softly. Your daughter wants pancakes. Tell her a woman she's never met says the syrup is on me. She'll ask your name, he said. Tell her Elena, she answered, then added, not for the room but for the one man in it who had earned the truth. Tell her I'm trying to be brave like her dad. The vendor came with contracts and frowns. The board came with sharp questions that bled to dull apologies. Headlines nipped at the story's ankles and then wandered off because steady choices don't trend as hard as disasters. In the weeks that followed, the factory became less of a rumor and more of a place again. Elena kept her promise the way she kept books, meticulously. Procurement got remapped. Efficiency had to show its math. Aftermarket improvisations went from secret to sanctioned only if they were documented and double-signed by people who would own the outcome. The engineer who smirked learned to hold the light and then, later, how to see. Daniel signed a contract employee, not contractor, with a clause he insisted on, apprenticeship slots for kids who didn't have a way in. You can call it community engagement, he said, but it's really how you get better at staying alive. He brought Ivy to the floor on a Saturday when the machines were sleeping and the sunlight had time to pour in and make the place handsome. She ran fingers over the cool metal and asked if it was the one that got sick. She forgot how to breathe, he said. We reminded her. Elena found them there, not by accident. She crouched to Ivy's height, aware of how little she knew about talking to children and how much she wanted to. Hi, Ivy. I'm Elena. Your dad saved my whole week. My dad saves breakfasts, Ivy said solemnly. He makes pancakes with little dinosaurs. Elena laughed, a real sound she hadn't made in front of employees in years. Dinosaurs are an underutilized leadership tool. They didn't fall in love like in movies, caught by a dare, sealed by applause. They felt like people who had learned to measure risk and still jump sometimes. Dinner to debrief turned into dinner to be there. A text about a part number became a text about a book someone liked. Trust, built in a night of choices, found places to live when the lights were softer. The company didn't soften exactly. It sharpened in different directions. Apprentices came in with shy hands and left with steady ones. The floor learned to speak up without fear of losing a paycheck. A wall near the break room filled with handprints and first names and a sentence above them: "We fix what's broken, including us." Years later, Ivy stood where her father had once stood, palm against Alara's skin. The machine was older, dignified, the way things get when they've been through enough to earn their quiet. Daniel put a small wrench in Ivy's hand the way you hand someone a story. "Remember," he said, "impossible is a word people try before they try the work. Start with listening." Elena stood beside them. Not the CEO, just Elena, in boots that had oil on them and a ring she wore without apology. She'd never forgotten that first night's contract made of hands and truth. When she looked at Daniel now, she didn't see a miracle or a mascot. She saw a partner. In choices, in repairs, in a kind of love that knew what it cost and paid gladly. A new apprentice walked by, eyes wide. "Is it true," she asked, half-whisper, "that you fixed it when everyone said you couldn't?" Daniel shrugged at Elena with a smile that had never learned how to brag. Elena answered for them both. "It's true," she said. "But the better story is what came after. We stopped asking machines to carry the weight of our pride." Alara hummed, as if agreeing. Outside, the city kept its promises poorly and well. Inside, they made fewer vows and kept more of them. The last line of noise in the building that night was not a roar, not applause, but the steady sound of work done with care. A kind of music. The kind that lasts.